myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on that.
Hi and welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith, and this is a Fab 4 special. This is Newcastle Disunited, where we look back at the fans, groups, organisations, protests which have taken place over our life period as Newcastle United fans. And why are we doing this? Well, because Mr. Hasty, Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Patterson and myself have all been part of these protests and part of these groups in some way, shape or form. So we thought it would be a good idea to maybe set the record straight, if you like, put a few cat amongst the pigeons, I would imagine as well, but simply be truthful, back it up with a bit of paperwork and a few stories to boot. So tonight, guys, we are looking at NUSC. And of course, that is something which you, Steve, played a big part in.
Yes, that's one of the banners that we had inside the ground. Not long after NUSC was formed, as you can see, I think it was 4 of them dotted, one on every side of the ground that I printed along with my pals at work. Just trying to get the message out among the supporters, and it was a TV game, I think, that one, where we wanted to really let people realise that Newcastle fans were really paid off. It's one of those things, isn't it, Steve? You get involved in protest groups and you get involved in situations that you'd never ever think you would. And I was looking back and I looked at the Chronicle. It was the 5th, I think it was the 5th of September 2008, and obviously Keegan was gone. And the Chronicle were putting up some crazy stories, and there was some fantastic stories flying around. One of them here I've got written down was that apparently Gus Poyet lived next door to Jimenez. So that was getting annoyed. I thought, what the hell's all that about? And then the next one was Lambias was good mates with David O'Leary. And I was thinking, God, Gus Poyet, then it's David O'Leary. He's going to end up as manager at Keegan. And then the Chronicle started suggesting a few names. They had suggested Zico. I don't know whether that was Zico who used to play for it or Zico the Brazilian, but he was mentioned. Gianluca Vialli, he was in, and so was Gianfranco Zola. Obviously, we got none of them. And then later on in that week, I think Adam Sadler, he got peddled from the club. Terry McDermott was gone. There was nobody left. And it was getting to the point where if we did have a protest of any sort, I think some of us thought we're going up there is it on an interview? We might have got the job ourselves because everybody else the dog was being put forward, So anyone who's not too sure, I mean, I just remember the chat rooms were ablaze with ideas and anger and annoyance. I've got emails from mates going, "What the hell's going on?" One lad was in his holidays and he interrupted his holidays to contact us, asking me if I knew what was going on. And then I think it was Talk of the Tyne. That was I don't know what you would describe Talk of the Tyne as, Steve. I mean, what would you call Talk of the Tyne? Was it it wasn't a podcast as such, was it? It wasn't a fanzine,
It used to be. Did it not used to be a fanzine around?
Fanzine, definitely.
Years ago, and then when the fanzine died off, and websites came into prominence, they went on for an online presence. I think it was the same people originally behind it, but all of these things. I mean, you mentioned chat rooms there. There'll be some younger viewers scratching their heads going, "Chat room? What's a chat room? Is that a room where you go to chat?" No, it's actually an online room where you could go in and you would chat. And it was the predecessor really to what we now have as Twitter and social media, and that was essentially what I remember Talk of the Tyne being a fanzine originally, because I used to stand next to the guys outside selling my Mighty Quinn and Number 9. But I think that's what it was, mate. I think it went online and became a website.
Yeah, and I think
fanzine eventually became like a combination of a online fanzine, if you will, with a message board. And it was the message board that particularly was the place where you got a lot of the ideas from. Yeah, because that's certainly how I got introduced into a lot of this, was through online message boards. Yeah, although I was often found in a very different one called Skunkers, which we'll probably talk about at some stage. But
Could have a Sean Maroon about that one. Could have a Sean Maroon about that one.
It was amazing. It was amazing how many fanzines were on the go then, though, because I remember like me, 2 years. You had yours, Steve. There was True Faith. There was the Mag. There was, there must have been 7 fanzines that were credible at the time. They'd have decent sales.
Biscuit.
So it might have been 7 or 8, but I think the chat rooms came after that when people started getting less and less print sales, and it became that would be the start of the digital era. So kids now will sit there and say, "Have you heard them old blokes going on about the chat rooms?" I mean, I probably think chat rooms are sex places where you go in the chat room and shows you where you can pick up some bird. I think, but it's I think then that one you talked about was probably the first one to branch off and do it. And you know, when people said to me NUSC, I thought it was just gonna be a massive supporters club. You know, that's what I thought. It ended up being a trust. But in them days, I always fantasized, like, it was always my ambition to see a supporters club that encompassed everything, where all the fanzines and all the fans and all the season tickets, everybody got in together. And I suppose even today, with the breakaways and the depleted fan base, even now, you know, if we got took over, it would be great if we had a fan base here in Saudi and we're all one official club, because I just think the various fractions end up breaking each other down. You know, I think we're quite depleted at the moment.
So, Steve, what did Talk of the Town actually do?
Well, Talk of the Town, they arranged a march. They arranged that. They put up a fantastic sort of script, if you like, of the anger that they were feeding in from, or was being fed into them from supporters, the annoyance, the disgust, and everything. And they put up a really, really strong case for supporters against what Ashley had done, and suggested that they organised a march from Tilly's on Westgate Road, up through what was left of Bath Lane, and then along to the ground. And it was to meet at Tilly's at 2 o'clock, or before that, and walk up to the ground and voice your protests outside St James's Park. There'd been a number of ideas. A lot of people wanted to protest in the ground, and I know that there was I think the Mag and even Biffa were very vocal in their the fact that they didn't feel as though that was the right way to go at that particular time. They wanted everything to be out. It was like a bit like we've had continuously all the way through, or it'll put the players off. You know, it's not the players' fault that Keegan's gone and what Ashley's done. And it was all of that sort of patter. And far better if you hit Ashley in the pocket with not buying the pies and the Bovril and don't buy the club shirts and stuff like that. That was the message that was coming out. But anyway, these lads put this march together. And from my point of view, I because we had the ability to print banners and such like that, we had the equipment at work. We thought, you know what, let's do as big a banner as we can get, and produced that great big long "Wanted for Crimes Against Newcastle United" banner, as well as the one that you put up there. That's the one. And I turned up with that on match day, and the whole idea was, I said to the lads, I said, I'm going to take this banner, we're going to hang it up outside the Strawberry Pub. We'll ask Michael if we can hang it from the back wall in what we called the embassy room, which was where people just went to smoke. And we said, we'll hang it over the embassy room wall, and we'll just see if we could get a microphone or a PA system, and people could shout their mouth off, and everybody could get the opportunity. That was our idea. And then obviously the march was put forward. So I turned up with our banner, and that was it. I think I mentioned on a show before, I got chased off by Sky TV because I was standing, and I'd already told the BBC what was going to happen, and they were going to film it and such like, and it was to try and get as much publicity as we could, just to rally the troops. And when the march arrived, they could see that they were being supported by fans who perhaps didn't want to be down at Tilly's or couldn't make it for the Tilly's march. But when they arrived, they could see that there was a group of fans outside the ground, and they were going to meet them and merge, that type of thing. So anyway, I produced that, and that was it. Really, I think that photograph with the lads on with the banner that ended up on. It ended up on TV. It ended up as far as Chinese media. It was in Chinese newspapers. It was in Vietnamese newspapers, Australian newspapers. And basically, I just said to a group of lads, look, there's a banner. You can stand with it. There's actually pictures of Ashley on one end, and there was pictures of Dennis Wise on the other. There's the big one, and that type of thing. And it was really just a way of voicing our feelings at that particular time. And I think it was from that we then, the True Faith and the MAG got together, and the editors of those fanzines, and decided that, you know what, there's a strength of feeling out there that's perhaps bigger than we thought, but there's an opportunity here that we need to see if we can galvanise the fans. And from that moment on, there was an announcement came out that there was going to be a meeting in the Irish Centre. And that's where we all trooped along. We didn't know each other or barely knew each other. We all trooped along into the concert room in the Irish Centre. And from that moment onwards, that became the birth of Newcastle United Supporters Club.
What kind of numbers were on the marches, Steve? I mean, obviously you have to deal with the police when you're doing this kind of thing, but I remember something in the region of 6,000 or 7,000.
Yeah. It was there was at least, I would say there was at least 6,000 or 7,000 on that march, and there was also a good 2,000 or 3,000 on Strawberry Place waiting, who hadn't done the march but then converged. And of course, there was also the people who were turning up for the match and then got caught up in the whole thing. And if you remember rightly, the entire concourse under the ground there that takes you up through the side of the Millburn, that was entirely chock-a-block packed with people. And the noise and the atmosphere that they were creating, it was quite intimidating for people who just wanted to go into the ground. So a lot of people stood back, a lot of people didn't want to, and I suppose that made it look even more. But the strength of feeling was so strong because the love for Kevin Keegan was so great, and the fact that everybody felt as though he was going to do the dirty on, or he had done the dirty on Kevin, but it wasn't. I mean, within what 48 hours, if I remember rightly, Ashley announced that he was selling the club anyway. That was it. I was selling it. That was it. Done. And that was like sort of kill the protests, kill any ideas you have. I'm out of this, lads. I'm out of it entirely. I'm gone. And he announced at 6 o'clock, I think, on the Sunday or the Monday that he was away. He was putting the club up for sale, and that was it. You don't need to protest anymore, guys. The club's up for sale. I found a couple of emails, a couple of things that were on the media that said that it was up for sale for 100 million. We then did some digging, and I think there's some documents that we subsequently dug out that showed the actual level of debt that was in the club at the time and what it had cost and this type of thing. But basically, that was Ashley within 48 hours trying to kill whatever protest movements there were from fans. And
what's your memories, Mitch, of that particular day, the march, etc.? Were you involved in that?
I tell you what surprised me, because I mentioned Skunkers, and the lads I used to go to match with and hang around with and go to away games with were all lads I knew through Skunkers or through from True Faith, because I was writing for True Faith now and then at the time as well. And to put it in context, if Skunkers was Twitter, every member would have been banned within 24 hours. That's kind of rather robust and rambunctious message board it was. And I love every one of them dearly, including the ones I hate and including the Mackhams that I used to get on there. And what surprised me, because we're a cynical lot, was to see lads from there, because we were all drinking in the bodega just up from Tilly's. When they saw how many people were out there, they wanted to get involved. And it was that was the first time I felt something unifying for a long time. And we'll probably touch on more stuff when we talk about the trust itself later. But to find people who were normally quite dismissive of any kind of action, any kind of positive action, say, actually, now I want to get in on this. Let's finish what pints and we often join the march after this.
You know what? What's interesting about that as well was that although it was talk at the time that made the announcements, the message that they sent out was actually from a group that I'd never heard of before, but you guys might have, called Toon Ultras. And I don't know whether it was the Toon Ultras phrase or whether there was genuinely a group called Toon Ultras, or whether it was just the lads who had got together.
There was a group
that organised it.
there was a group and they had members on pretty much every message board going, and they were able to sort of galvanise that a little bit. And so I mean they were younger than the crowd I hung around with, and they wanted to use the Ultra name because I mean obviously the connections to Italian football, but also Ultras in Italian football are very proactive.
Yeah,
and this was probably one of the most proactive things I've seen happen. I mean, I've said before on other shows, and I'll say it again on all of these shows, getting Newcastle United fans together is like herding cats, and we've experienced that firsthand. Even down to doing something simple like a travel club. The travel club worked really well in the 70s and 80s. And then the minute South Yorkshire Police started taking all your beer off you, Newcastle United's travel club fell apart very quickly because everybody wanted to find their own ways to the game in their own way and be able to have half a pallet of beer on the way and there and back again as well, without being disturbed mainly by South Yorkshire Police. And so since that point, there's been nothing that allowed the groups to come together and focus on one objective. And the fact that Ashley picked probably the worst person he could turn on publicly to make the fans have a focal point, a single thing to focus on, to say, right, this is getting us together. And that was the interesting part of that. And obviously with people like the Mag and the True Faith and their editors, and even Bifford.com would point out, look, this is something that shows we can get together on something, and there's an opportunity to set something up here that could become something much more than the sum of the parts, as it were. And that level of passion and exposure that we got on that day, it was fantastic, and it set the building blocks to start conversations that probably should have been had decades before.
Not the first supporters club, it's got to be said. I mean, Malcolm Dix in his younger days had obviously set up a similar kind of club back in the 70s, and of course, none of us will forget the Newcastle United Supporters Club with Sadie and co at the Haymarket, where many hours were spent rifling through match programs and looking for new bits and bobs that you could buy and take home. And of course, they had their own travel club. But Keith, what's your first thoughts and memories of the NUSC? That we were part of during the Ashley reign. That meeting. What was that meeting that Steve mentioned at the Irish Centre? Did you go to it?
Yeah, I was there. I remember when I was in Mauritius when Keegan went, and I remember the signings we were expecting coming through, they didn't come through. And I remember the clash with Dennis Wise and what was going on there. And I was angry. I've never been more angry because Keegan was always been my hero. And I got a few phone calls, people like Mickey Edmondson, Mark Jensen, Michael Martin, Steve Hasty, Colin Whittle. They were all getting together. And it didn't just happen. You don't get someone as big as that. You don't get 6,000 or 7,000 fans marching through the street and meet and having 3,000 waiting to greet them without organisation. But I quickly learned that from the Save Our Seats campaign, I'd developed some kind of reputation as some kind of wordsmith or marketing person or print out, put it all together. So I got a phone call, and Colin Whittle, who'd been one of the claimants on Save Our Seats, says, Keith, we need you to come and help us because we're going to do something. And that's when I met Steve Hasty and him. And what them lads were doing is it's like when something goes wrong at Newcastle, I think good lads come forward and they were just very, very enthusiastic about how we'd been somewhere. All of a sudden, we weren't going back there. And it's as though these fans, Steve, seem to see through the obvious, and they seem to be able to predict. I mean, you usually have done it on the Fab Four shows where you predicted what will happen, who'll come out, this will happen next. And Steve Hasty and Colin Whittle and them were doing that then. And the likes of me and Mickey Edmondson were just turning up and getting some of our pals to come and getting the numbers up. But when we got to the Irish Centre, it was like, shit, it was a real proper event. Like I think when you put a room on like that, you think, well, they fill it. And then as soon as they open the door and put you around the corner, you think, whoa, are you going to get a seat? And it was just typically Newcastle fans that had been wronged. But I don't think it was just the Ashley era. I think it was like going back with like the Neely men. You know, we've so often come close to things, and then people get up and speak, and then that thing happens when Newcastle supporters take the stage and different people speak, and it just takes over. So I wasn't surprised. I was never a marcher. I was never a bloke who, like, you know, stood and did things. I guess I was more an organizer, more somebody that would get behind the scenes, and I put money up, and I just said, whatever print you want, you can have, and I'll get it designed for you, and, you know, I'll proofread it. And all I ever used to say to people is, I'm just a catalyst. It'll not be my words, it'll be your words. And Steve Hurst, remember that, where I was talking to you lot and saying to you, look, you tell us what you want to say, and I'll get it put out there. And then when the words came, oh,
there you go.
That's the worst thing with Steve. Whenever you work with Steve Hasty, he's got like fingerprints. The last time he sat at his coffee table, but kind of.
That's a classic. That's an email from you, Keith,
shit.
from Keith Patterson, where you're actually seeing that. You're actually seeing the first run of pamphlets of 10,000 you'd arranged, the size of them. You told us, you gave us all the opportunity. You said there you've sent a copy to Michael Martin and to Mark, and they're checking it over. Colin's going to contact you. All that, everything's there in that email, you know. And that was an email that you sent out. And I think that, if I remember rightly, we'd had a couple of meetings by then. We'd had 250 people in a room, and then from that there was about 30 or 40 people who came and put their names down and gave their email details. Neil was there. We those who felt as though we could put something together, we did it. And then Michael Martin, I remember, you know, when went over, he had a bit of paper, and he was taking all the email addresses down and telephone numbers. And then he really got involved, and he said, look, you know, I'll contact you all. He did. He said, we're gonna, you know, if you're interested in doing something more, then, you know, we'll have another meeting. I've spoken to Bill Corcoran, who can get the rooms for us at the Irish Centre, and we'll have another meeting next week, and we'll all come together. And that kind of formed like an informal little group of, I think there was about 25 or 30 in the end, who came together, just normal lads, normal fans. You were there, Mitch. Tom Lynch was there.
Peter Whitfield, Chris Betts.
Yes, Chris Betts. Colin Cooper.
Johnny Rose.
Mark. Colin Whittle. Mickey Edmondson. All the lads who wanted.
I was there, but deliberately sat out of the way. Really, because I was there to support it. Biffa was there as well, I remember, but I just deliberately kept out of the way because I believed that this was the right way forward. And although I had differences of opinion, or should I say other people had differences of opinion with me, I personally wanted to show that I supported it, but I didn't put myself forward because I thought that's just going to create a problem, and I didn't want to create a problem.
That's right, and that's the sort of, you know, it was never a case of like, this is for Uber fans, this is for people who are popular, this is for people who are known. This was just a group of lads who had never met before, and they put their, to coin your phrase, Steve, put their head above the parapet. But once it got going, we knew that we would have the backing of people like yourself who were involved in fanzines, who could go on to media and talk, not necessarily on our behalf, but it could explain what we're trying to do. It was exactly the same with a number of other people. There were lads that I'd never met in my life, and I think probably 9/10 of the people that were there I'd never seen before, but I see regularly, still going to the match, still keep in contact with quite a few of them. We have a chat in the Strawberry pre or post match, and we look back on things. Malcolm Shield, wasn't it, Mitch? He was another lad who put his name forward, who ended up sticking his hand up and said, I'll be the interim, organizer of this in terms of doing the emailing and trying to pull the thing together for you because I've got that particular skill. And that's all you wanted. You just want people with a particular skill who could get there. Peter Whitfield and some of the other lads on the IT side who could help with a chat room or whatever, getting the message out.
Michael Teasdale, who was superb with words as well.
That's right.
Tony Stevenson, who was just a good organizer.
Yeah.
Lisa
Bullivant.
Lisa Bullivant. Yeah. But the thing is, when we used to do them short, when he was doing that things, I didn't put my hand up and say, I'll get the. What happens is you get in there and everybody gets excited, and then someone like Colin will stand up and say, right, what we're going to do, we're going to have a march and we're going to, there you go. Absolute. And I love that bloke. Honestly, when he used to stand up and then he turned around and he'd go, we're going to have a march and we're going to do leaflets. Keith, you do the leaflets. And I thought, whoa. And then the next thing is Colin Whitler's told everybody that I'm going to do the leaflets. And then, and Keith will design them. And before you know it, it's the same crap you had on Save Our Seats being carried over. But Colin knew who to get in, who to lumber it. And then when you just sort of felt you had to do something because it all took you over in their meetings. And like Steve Wraith says, it's one thing showing your support to sitting in the room. I think that's exactly what I went for, Steve, just to sit and say I support it. Because I'd support anything. If Keegan was gone and he'd left, because he wasn't happy, I'd have supported it blindly. But I've never been a bloke who's carried a banner or stood or banged or shouted. I've always been somebody that's just looked at something and said, I'm in with that or I'm out. I get a distinct. On this, I thought it was the first time that with the NUSC, and I'm going to stress that when I thought, I get this. This is just people like me who are fans who've had the glory days of Keegan, who's had all the Richard Dennis, Gordon Lee, Adela, and we just don't want to not return to what we had. We wanted to go back to them great days. And even now, if you talk about NCSL, it's the desire to compete and go back to Keegan days. It's that period we talked about the other night about the blue and red top and all that. And that's where, when we were in that Irish Centre that day, I came out. I mean, I was making a 50-mile round trip to get there. Every time you said, we'll have a meeting tomorrow. And then the print was coming from Teesside. We had a printers there called Mags, M-A-G-S, Mags. We're a name for printers in Teesside. And we just got it done. And Cravens were around the corner. We had a designer in there for us. And we just did these leaflets. And when the first day came, you just thought, shit, this is big. But you know what it is, Steve, when you say you give it your word. I knew once I dropped all them boxes of print off, I knew they didn't need me after that. Till next time they wanted some more work doing. But then the lads on the street took over, didn't they? And then they marched. And in fairness, they kept it orderly and they were respectful. And there was a lot of people, I thought, planning it. You know what I mean? And saying we're having to do this and let's not do that. And I saw some of them notes where it says, if don't hit shoppers, don't pester people shopping. We just, our target audience is football fans.
Yeah.
So it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, there's another example, isn't it? That one there. I mean, this was just the press release that went out about what the march was about, what the organisation was about, what we were trying to achieve as a group of just ordinary fans. Organised, set up Newcastle fans to give fellow supporters a collective voice. Simple. There were 4 points on there, very, very simple, straightforward, that were put out to the press just to explain. And you want to, when we talk about the leaflets, it wasn't exactly a straightforward dishing out of a set of leaflets, was it, Mitch?
No, God, no.
As Peter Whitfield and one or two others will vouch for him. I mean, believe it or not. Go on, you
looking after the boxes. Was it out the back page?
We had the back page to collect the boxes. That's right. I think that's where Keith had dropped them off with Mickey, and it was a case of putting messages out saying we want people to come along the back page and take 200 each, and whichever bar you were going to or wherever, could you just dish them out? And at the same time, we wanted people to be on Strawberry Place or Leesers Park Road or wherever it happened to be.
Barrack Road, yeah.
Barrack Road as well, exactly, and just dishing out the leaflets. And I think what was surprising, wasn't it, was that we did have other fans who started giving the lads abuse.
Yes.
For we got a situation. There was a situation where the council arrived and started to say that where you haven't got a lanyard round your neck with permission to dish out a leaflet.
Licenses.
And then the police came and it was like, well, lads, if you keep on doing this, we're going to lift you. So I think somebody had the brainwave that if you kept walking and you dished them out, they couldn't stop you. We weren't standing on because somebody said that there was like, well, the rule was if you stood there dishing them out, you'd get lifted. So we started slowly walking when dishing them out and stuff like that, just to try and get yourself around the rule book, if you like.
There was lads taking bundles and leaving them in the centre of tables and pubs. It was mad, but I mean, it was amazing how many people who said they would show did show.
Yeah.
And then people like Pete Whitfield and Tom Lynch went out once and then come back for more. You know, and you're like, what are you doing with them? You know, just chuck them in. No, we'll hand them out. You know, and so I'm keeping track of what we've got left, trying to hand out bits and bobs. And then the word filters back that some of the lads were getting hassled at one side of the ground. This cop was threatening to arrest people at the other side of the ground. And then the club stewards were forcefully taking people off the club land. So they were arguing over like about 2 inches of pavement on occasion. It was just one of those. This is descending into chaos a little bit now. I hope we can all keep it all together without all of or some of us getting arrested at one point. But the message got over, and that was the thing. In spite of all of that, everybody did their bit. And I kind of thank everybody who got involved that day, because the amount of leaflets we got out there and the message that got out there.
Wasn't there a little tear?
There was a little tear off coupon, wasn't it? There was a
coupon on the bottom where you could send back and say, yeah, you wanted to put your name down and be a member. And that was because it was a numbers game. That's what it was all about. Get as many people behind you as possible, as many supporters to join you, and who were of equal mind. We saw that as being the most important aspect of what we were doing at that particular time.
Yeah.
It was a message to the club that this isn't anything other than Newcastle United supporters coming together, and it's not 200 people in a room. This is 5,000 people, 10,000 people, or what it subsequently ended up with, 28,000 people who'd sent little slips back and who joined organisations and transferred their allegiance to NUSC when it eventually morphed into that a year and a half later. But that's what it was about. It was about sending a message. And I think what was also important was that we didn't, just because Ashley decided that he was selling the club, we weren't believing that. Now, in hindsight, what a great idea that was. Yeah, we didn't take Ashley's word for that he was going to sell the football club, did we? Even though he told us within 48 hours of the first protest that he was going to sell it. We knew he wasn't going to sell that football club. And we're still sitting here now. We've now got Keith trying to twist everybody's arm, and Ashley has to turn around and say, "I am selling it. I desperately want to sell it." But that's 14 years later. You know, at that particular time. He made that announcement. We knew that it wasn't going to be an easy stretch, and what we had to do was we had to make sure that we kept the pressure on him to keep his word, if you like, and to realise that he wasn't welcome, and that was what that was all about. At least I thought that's what it was all about, anyway.
Well, going back to them mornings, you know that Saturday when we give the leaflets out, I always remember Mickey Edmondson, because remember Mickey was the DJ. So Mickey done like Idols and Sports Cup and that. And so on the morning before he went DJing, that's when all the lads turned up the boxes. And I says, look, I only want one drop-off point because I don't want to be driving around, trying to get around the ground with boxes of. And Mitch is bang on, like the most you could take was 100, right? And Mitch, when Mitch said that, it just goes back to like you're back in the time. And I thought, and then people were coming back to Mickey's, and like Mickey's getting calls saying, "This kid's wanting more leaflets." And they were going, "Print some more, Keith." So Mickey turned around to me and says, "Can you print some more?" And I'm thinking, hold on a minute. There's a game kicking off in 3 hours' time, and they want some more leaflets done on a full colour press, and it's in Middlesbrough. Like, it's physically and totally impossible. You'd be somebody to get them tomorrow. It was like, can you get some more? They're gone berserk. And Mitch is on it. There was people telling people off for putting them on tables. Didn't put them on tables. Just give them one each to share. Let them pass it round. How are you going to do this? But you know what it is? Laugh all we want. 10,000 people the first day were congregated at the ground, and they were up for it. And it wasn't from, you know, I went from the pub, which I always go pre-match, up there to watch it all rolling out. And it was orderly. You know, that was the one thing about it. I don't think, you know, there was lots of threats of arrest, but it was done. I think when you look at the purpose was, you've just said on that leaflet, it was just to give a voice to ordinary Newcastle fans. And it's incredible that you've just touched on a subject there as well, which is close to my heart. I remember people just giving leaflets out, and quiet people getting grief, getting abuse. You don't know what you're doing. You're doing more harm than good, and arguing with them. And it's no different to what's happened to NCSL today, because 99% of people love what you're doing, but you couldn't have a more stronger target today than a takeover. And you couldn't have a stronger, more target then than we don't want to lose Kevin Keegan, and we want the Keegan days back, and we don't want Dennis Wise running our football club. We don't want managers like Joe Kinnear, etc., etc. And even then, and even today, everybody knows how much abuse I get. If you think what Steve Wraith does and how many shows he does and what he's done through lockdown, go to the people who serviced it and watched it, and they'll say it's been brilliant. But you'll still get abuse, and it doesn't matter how good the idea is. Like the idea then to get a voice for fans was as good as the idea now to take over, and you'll always get a minority, which is it's great, really, hearing this today, because you think, well, we've got past that, we'll get past this. You know what I mean? When the other thing that's good is we knew then that it wasn't a genuine we'll sell the club, and 2008 that was. It's now 2021. 13 years later, we've been proven right. And you said earlier we rely on Keith. Well, I went to the club and they convinced me before I've spent my own money that they definitely want to sell it this time. And I think this week's proven that they still want to sell it now. So let's just do this. Let's hope.
So, I mean, all of these things get off to a good start. And like you said earlier, Steve, the atmosphere in the club that night, there wasn't a seat to be had, 30 odd volunteers, Steve. And, obviously a big march, 7,500, 8,000 people, whatever it was, walking through Newcastle, organised very well. Where did it go? Where did it peak? And then where did it start to decline?
I suppose that once we realised that the interest was there, once we'd seen what had happened after the leaflet drop that we did, I can't even remember who we were playing. I think, was it Aston Villa? I'm not too sure. It might have been Villa game. I can't remember. But after that, we said, you know what? Let's get together. We've seen the success of leaflet drop. We had hundreds and hundreds of these little slips that were coming in. They were coming to a PO box, I think, and they were also being dropped off at the back page, and were being brought in envelopes back up by Mark and the rest of the lads, and other people were, they were getting them dropped off at work, you name it. And I think at that point we realised, hang on, this has got more than a protest momentum to it, and we needed to formalise that into a proper supporters club. So at that point, we said, we've got those 4 points. They make the 4 points that were on the leaflet. They make almost a constitution, if you like, of what we're trying to achieve in staying together. And that's when we started to have some other ideas about how we could keep the pressure going. And that was that we had to keep the momentum going. That was the important feature of NUSC, but it also had to have a little bit more organisation to it, because like all of these type of things, once you start something, people start looking for guidance. They start looking for, I'm not saying the word leadership as such, but they're looking for someone or a group of people to actually guide them into the direction that they feel as though is the best way, or that they would like to follow. So that's where it started going to. And we formalized a group within the 25. We started chat room. We put a website up, all done by volunteers, people with their experiences on the internet and on web design. Peter Whitfield was excellent at what he could do, which was putting together that chat room that we created. And basically, the structure was there. Then there was a definite structure to what we were trying to achieve. I think it's also fair to say that we needed to keep the momentum. It was important to keep the momentum going. So I suppose the next stage was getting the club to listen to us, if I'm right. And it was at that point that I think we're having a meeting every Monday sometimes we're meeting twice a week. We actually met. We actually had a meeting 2 days before Christmas, if I remember rightly. That shows you how some of these lads were and lasses. There's something cropping up. We want to do it. It's like, and we had a meeting on the 22nd of December because we wanted to do something around the Liverpool game of the 28th. And so that's how, dedicated people were to getting this done. And I think that particular one was we wanted to do a collection for the Sir Bobby Robson Foundation. We wanted to align ourselves with something that the fans could feel as though they were putting something back to. So we organised a bucket drop, and we got permission this time, and we'll work with the Sir Bobby Robson Foundation to start a bucket collection at that Liverpool game. But we had all sorts of other little ventures that went on. But as I say, some of the lads, like Bill, had been involved, hadn't this, in what was the original fans liaison group. And so when we found out that because some of us weren't aware of this group even, I think Steve, you were aware of it because I think you had been fans liaison officer, but we were certainly aware of it. But we found out that there was a meeting that took place that had members of the press, Chronicle, Journal, Sunday Sun. It had supporters from around the ground, people who had put their names forward. I don't know how it came about, but they were meeting with the likes of Lambias and other members of the club. And this had been what had been described to us as a cosy meet. And so we decided on this particular, somebody decided, I think it was Colin actually decided that why don't we just go along? And it's a supporters meeting. It's a meeting with the club. So why don't we just turn up? So 12 of us did.
Didn't we persuade Bill to exercise a loophole in the regulations for the meeting? Because Bill, and this will show you how times have changed, not just now, worldwide, but on Tyneside. I believe Bill was on that committee as cultural and diversity representative because he was from the Irish Centre.
That's right. Yes. He had an Irish sounding name in Corcoran, so they loved him.
Anyway, he was on that committee, and there was a rule that he could invite so many guests. And he worked out he could invite 12 because he hadn't invited any guests up to that point. So we just turned up.
Yeah, the security guy nearly passed out as we all walked up from the stairs. And if the security guy's heart was going, then Derek Lambias' heart was certainly going 50 to the dozen when the 12 of us walked through the door just as he was about to speak. But I must admit, so did quite a lot of the fans who were sitting around. Because there was a beautiful buffet laid on, and they were all standing in the queue. And of course, we took their seats as well, didn't we? I was sitting there. Well, where were you? Well, I was getting me chips. I was getting me sandwiches. And of course, the press. There was. I'm sure Lee Ryder was there. I'm sure, perhaps Mark Douglas or one. I don't know. I couldn't swear for the life of me who they were, but there were certainly members of the press who were like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" As we walked through the door, because they had a 15-minute slot where they would also be able to ask Lambias questions, and of course we walked in and that was it. He went absolutely scatty. I wanted to know what was going on. But it was a laugh, if nothing else, to see the look on his face. And Mitch, you were there, so you can explain what happened to you.
Well, that was at the second meeting. At the first meeting, it was poor Mike.
Yeah, because we carried on doing it. Yeah,
it was poor Mike Teasdale who got it at the first meeting because he did actually answer a question and then ask a follow-up question that he didn't like, and poor Michael got it the first time round. And because obviously you and I picked Bill's brains before we went in about what actually happens at these meetings, and we'd also picked. My dad knew somebody who was involved on the outside of it, so I was able to pick his brains. the words he'd used was, it was cosy, hand-picked people who were supposed to be there, and the biggest topic of conversation was how cold the chips were by half-time. And everything else was cosy and rosy and lovely, which we all know it wasn't and rarely is. And so that first meeting was fantastic. Just watching Derek get handed a piece of paper halfway through, going down the list, pointing at a name and then pointing at the person, pointing at a name, and the guy with the list points at the person.
Yeah.
So he had all of what identified. So the first chance he got, he tried to rail Michael Teasdale up, who I thought was fantastic, held his own. Without cutting too much out, we got invited to a second meeting when he tried the same thing with me, except he got rather red-faced and started poking us in the chest. I think the objective was to get me to stick one on him, because then he could go to the press and say, look, these horrible Newcastle fans have assaulted us. All I did was laugh in his face, because it was one of the most amusing things I've ever seen anybody do in an age. And you think, great, got you now, because you've lost it. You've lost your cool, you've lost your temper, you've lost your ability to act in any way, shape or form. And the more that we interacted with him, interestingly, the more you found out that that was all a pantomime villain.
Yeah.
If Derek was to turn up in the pub tonight, I'd buy him a pint and have a chat with him.
Yeah.
And I know for a lot of Newcastle fans, that must be an unusual thing for someone like me to say. But once you get to know how he works, and you don't let him push your buttons, and he knows he's not going to let you push your buttons, he becomes a different character.
That's right. Yeah.
But that's probably for a later story, particularly trust related. But yeah, those first two meetings were feisty. Hilarious how we managed to get into it. But even better, they kept winning it.
Yes.
We must have done something right, because we were allowed to come back, and then we were actually formally invited back.
Yeah. I think what was interesting as well, because at one point in that second one, if I remember right, he stormed off. He stormed out the room. He was getting himself all right. He stormed out the room, and we turned. I think was it David Williamson who ran the race course, who had come on the board at the time. And I remember what's up with him, and he's got he needs to calm down. And then he came back, and he was a totally different person. He'd stepped out the room, poured the bucket of water over his head, and then brushed his hair back, and come back in, and he was back to the sort of pleasant. But I think maybe it's the penny drop with him, because you're right. I mean, and if I know people think that he was sort of like the villain of the piece, and yes, he was to a certain extent. But what I think, if you look back, he was one of the few, and it's related in an article in the Athletic today, actually, about Lambias, that he stood his ground with Ashley. Ashley didn't get what he wanted necessarily from Lambias. Lambias was the sort who would tell him when he thought he was wrong or what he was doing wrong, and I think that there was I think we spotted that very, very early on, with the mutual respect that eventually was created. I'm not saying we were best of pals by any way, shape or form. I think he was very slippery and a character and a half, but he was somebody that you could, as you rightly say, hold a conversation with. And I remember when the terrace bar opened, and he sent invites out to people saying, "Would you like to come along?" And I went along with our Jed, and Jed turned around afterwards again. He's actually a canny bloke, isn't he? Because he was that's what his job was. His job was he ran casinos. His job was to do the cozying and the chat and get you to spend your money and that type of thing. And that's what he was good at. And that made him a pleasant person to be in the company of in that respect. What was difficult was when you were telling him he was wrong, and he didn't like to hear, and we were telling him the home truths, which is what he got in the first two meetings. So that was a great insight into the dynamics of what was going on behind the scenes at the football club at that particular time, which we were privileged to be witnessing, I suppose, just as ordinary fans.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, Lambias in those early days reached out to a few people. I mean, I had his mobile phone number. Who would have ever expected that to develop in the friendship that it did? And he was on a charm offensive. He was on a charm offensive with everybody. But I remember saying to you guys, I'm always very wary of anyone who's in that position, who's so open to give his number out. He clearly had a motive, and I think that will become more evident as we do a couple more of these programs. Go on, Mitch.
I remember that day we were coming in and you were going down the escalator the opposite way, being escorted by
that will come up. That will come up in a later episode, I'm sure. Yes, but we've got 5 minutes left, guys. Let's just finish this one off on NUSC. So, next episode we're going to talk about the trust and how that came about. That was the next step. Who pushed that? Who pushed that particular agenda?
Colin Whittle. Colin Whittle, 100%. Because he talked to me about it for ages, and Colin used to ring us one-on-one, and I met him a couple of times. I remember being in an away game, and he stood talking to us for about 20 minutes before the start, and then at half-time. And Colin had a dream and a vision. You know what I mean? His vision. Colin Whittle was so instrumental in this. That's when you brought that pitch up there. It was brilliant. That's how I used to say Colin Whittle stand up and take a mic.
Yeah,
he's one of the most likeable lads. I remember when they were picking the people for Save Our Seats, and everyone wanted to do it. They could only pick 6 out, and everybody was rooting for Colin. And when he came at the forefront of this, that was great. And then he turned around and said, "My dream is one day the fans will own the football club." And me and Colin were like, we still remain very, very, very close friends. Christmas card every year. Give him a hug when I saw him last week at the food bank. But he had his idea of this trust and had his idea of these shares, and he wasn't changing for nobody. So if anybody says it was anyone else, I'll say you're not doing him justice, because Colin Whittle was the champion of the trust.
Yeah, I think what you've got to say is that the idea of a supporters trust was kind of to get your national recognition. It was at a particular time when supporters trust as such was relatively new. It was being fed out of Supporters Direct. It wasn't part of the Football Supporters Association at the time. That didn't exist. That came when Supporters Direct and the FSF merged. But Supporters Direct was an organisation that had been set up to help lower league clubs and fans of lower league clubs to really get into fan ownership. Ironically, something that in a way that hasn't changed, because it's very much to do with when football clubs are struggling financially, when they look like they're going to fold, and when the very people who need to come to the fore to keep the club afloat are the fans. And it's only at that point that owners of football clubs suddenly realise how important fans are. Now, we're going through this sort of transitional phase at the moment where we haven't had fans in the ground, and now we're coming back. And it's going to be an interesting thing right across the whole football hierarchy and through the pyramid. And I think some clubs will be desperate for fans to set up supporters trusts and get more involvement supporters, and so will this whole idea of the governance of football. But at that particular time, Colin just saw a legitimacy in an organisation that already had quite a decent membership number, morphing into something more substantive. Manchester United had a supporters trust.
That's right.
And that was virtually it. There wasn't anyone of the stature of Newcastle United. And Colin saw that as a really, really big mark in the sand for Newcastle supporters.
Great stuff. Well, a big shout out to our sponsor, Spider VPN, for all your internet security. Also, a big shout out to skipsandbins.com, 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com. Website www.skipsandbins.com. Easy, contract free, and pay as you go waste collection. Also, a big shout out to John at qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Walls and Newcastle, and to Jab Signature. And if you're a first time visitor to the channel, hit the subscribe button by hitting the Newcastle Legends logo, hit the thumbs up to like, hit the share button to share to your social media, and drop into the comments. Lads, fantastic show that, and we'll be back with the rise and the birth of NUST. Look forward to joining you then. Take care, lads. Bye-bye.
Cheers. See you later.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back